There is a very big story behind the president's May 14th post. This is what he said. When President Xi very elegantly referred to the United States as perhaps being a declining nation, he was referring to the tremendous damage we suffered during the 4 years of Sleepy Joe Biden and the Biden administration. And on that score, he was 100% correct. 2 years ago, we were, in fact, a nation in decline. On that, I fully agree with President Xi. But now the United States is the hottest nation anywhere in the world. Now, the president did that post in the wake of Xi Jinping's comments about the so-called Thucydides trap. Here's what she said at the state banquet. Currently, transformation not seen in a century is accelerating across the globe, and the international situation is fluid and turbulent. The world has come to a new crossroads. Can China and the United States overcome the Thucydides trap and create a new paradigm of major country relations? So suddenly the Thucydides trap was trending on Google search, and people were being told that it is a fact of history that one empire declines and another rises, and then conflict is inevitable. The media was all over it. China is rising, the U.S. is declining, Trump got nothing on his visit. The headlines portrayed Trump and the U.S. as the losers, like these. Trump's China trip underscores how power has shifted east. Or, did Xi tell Trump the U.S. is in decline? Donald Trump had already blown up that narrative before he even got to China. First, as Trump's post affirms, the United States is most definitely no longer in decline. And even more important, the president is creating a world in which sovereign nations can progress together without imperial manipulation or conflict. I'm Susan 𝓘𝓷𝓽𝓻𝓸𝓭𝓾. Not only have I studied how the British Empire has manipulated the geopolitical chessboard for centuries, but I'm also steeped in Greek history. And I know that the so-called Thucydides trap was created by a student of Henry Kissinger to cover for the British Great Game. So if you want to go beyond the empire's version of history, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons. Now, here's what I'm going to talk about today. First, what was the real world power that President Trump brought into the Chinese summit? Second, how the British cooked up the idea of the Thucydides trap as yet another chapter in their geopolitical cookbook, and how Trump is tossing that book into the trash. So, at the summit, the media wanted to focus on the deliverables. What did the United States get on trade, on Iran, on Taiwan? Well, we actually did get a lot on trade. But that narrative about the deliverables really misses what Trump actually did at the summit. He arrived in Beijing with the chief executives from the most powerful countries in America. People like Elon Musk, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, the CEOs of Boeing, GE Aerospace, Cargill, and top tech and financial companies. This was, by every account, the wealthiest American business delegation ever assembled on foreign soil. And what did the president do? He crashed the bilateral meeting with them. Here's how he described it to Sean Hannity.
From chips to planes to everything. And they're all here. I didn't invite them. They all wanted to come. And they're all here. And I suggested that before we start the meeting, I'd like to introduce them to you. And they were surprised because it wasn't scheduled. Once the Chinese leadership, because it was President Xi and many other leaders, once they got used to the fact that we're a little off schedule here and we're talking about a subject that wasn't even thought about, but they were outside. I said, I think we can get them in 5 minutes, because they were literally, a few minutes away from the room where we were in the Great Hall. We were in the Great Hall. And they came in and they did fantastically well. It was really good. I think he actually said, that was very good. That was a good idea. But it was very different from what the schedule had.
Let that sink in. The president hijacked the meeting to bring the might of America's economy into the room. And he did more. He brought his defense secretary. This is the first time a defense secretary has accompanied a sitting president since 1972. That was the year Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger opened up China. The post-Nixon framework deliberately kept the Pentagon out of these summits, and Donald Trump just ended that tradition. Now, during the summit, Trump made clear he was not playing by the rules that had been set up by British imperial policy handlers like Henry Kissinger. First and foremost is Kissinger's insane doctrine of mutual and assured destruction, where the world is constantly held hostage to the threat of thermonuclear war. Donald Trump talked to Xi Jinping about denuclearization. When a reporter looking for deliverables pressed Trump on Chinese arms reduction, Trump took the question somewhere else entirely.
We brought it up, the denuclearization. I talk about it all the time with Russia and with China, and it did come up. We did discuss it.
And what did you conclude?
I don't know. I got a very positive response since the beginning.
I'm trying to understand what it is he committed to, if he committed anything.
Well, I don't want to say anybody committed, but we have a very good understanding.
So are you
You know,
going to
the
move it?
concept of denuclearization.
Denuclearization or just an extension
Well, no,
of the
a
start?
denuclearization.
In other words, building down.
And you bring Russia into it also. But the concept of that is something would be very good.
Between the United States, Russia, and China, China has been the most recalcitrant of those three. And Donald Trump used the summit to put denuclearization on the table directly with Xi. Second, Taiwan. This is another geopolitical trigger point to keep the superpowers on the verge of war. The president was badgered by questions about arms sales to Taiwan in the framework of assurances that were given to Taiwan in 1982, assurances that a U.S. president would not talk to China about arms sales. Here's what the president said.
So what am I going to do? Say I don't want to talk to you about it? Because I have an agreement that was signed in 1982? No, we discussed arms sales to
And what's his request?
we discussed to Taiwan, you know, the whole thing with the arms sales. It was in great detail, actually. And I'll be making decisions.
What was his request?
But, you know, I think the last thing we need right now is a war that's 9,500 miles away.
That is Donald Trump's bottom line. He is not going to fight wars on terms set by the British Empire. And here's what the big thing he really brought into the room was. He brought a revived United States, which has already reshaped the world and which has edged China out of influence in the Western Hemisphere, and a United States which now holds all the cards in the Mideast, as that May 14th post showed. The president said, President Xi was not referring to the incredible rise of the United States that is displayed to the world during the 16 spectacular months of the Trump administration, which includes all-time high stock markets and 401ks, military victory and thriving relationship with Venezuela, the military decimation of Iran, to be continued, and the strongest military on earth by far, economic powerhouse again, with a record $18 trillion being invested into the United States by others, the best U.S. job market in history, with more people working in the United States right now than ever before. Now, to put this all in context, go back to what President Xi said about a transformation not seen in a century. Well, this is 2026. And a century ago, in 1926, China was not under a communist government. In fact, the founder of modern China, who was an American system advocate, Sun Yat-sen, had just died in 1925. And in the intervening decades, China was an ally of the United States in World War II, as President Trump referred to in his toast.
As allies in World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt's mentions of the brave people of China, that's what they were, drew loud cheers in his speeches in the United States, and everybody loved what he had to say.
Think about that. 100 years ago, the British had not yet pitted the U.S. and China against each other, nor had they helped facilitate the CCP's takeover of China. But that's a story for another time. Now, I sometimes get comments about how the Chinese have always tried to dominate the world. Well, if you want to read real history, the one where it's the British Empire that has tried to dominate the world for the past 300 years, then you need to subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. We're not going to give you the phony history, which has been rewritten by the British. We will show you how the fight has been one of sovereign nations led by the United States against the empire. So use the link and sign up for our free newsletter. Because that fight is exactly what the Thucydides trap was designed to obscure. Now, this idea first came up by a fellow named Graham Allison. Graham Allison first floated the Thucydides trap concept in a 2012 Financial Times essay. Then he turned it into a book in 2017 entitled Destined for War: Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap? The core argument is, as one empire rises, another declines, and war is inevitable. And he identified 16 cases over 500 years, and 12 of them ended in war. Well, let's start with who Graham Allison himself is. He got to Harvard on a Marshall Scholarship, which is funded, you ready for this, by an act of the British Parliament and administered by the UK Foreign Office. Its stated purpose is to cultivate promising young Americans who understand British ideals and the British way of life. Then Allison went to Oxford, and then he came back to Harvard, where he studied under Henry Kissinger. Now, our regular followers have heard us quote Henry Kissinger before, when he told Chatham House, "When I was Secretary of State, I kept the British Foreign Office more closely informed than the State Department." So that's Graham Allison's pedigree. Now, let's start with his basic idea. He cites this one sentence from Thucydides talking about the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. It was the rise of Athens and the fear that this installed in Sparta that made war inevitable. Now, what Allison leaves out is the same thing that British imperial historians always leave out: the role of empire. If you read Plato's dialogues carefully, which I have, you'll see that it was the Persian Empire orchestrating the conflict between Sparta and Athens. They not only had open influence in Sparta, but they controlled key figures in Athens, as Plato documents in his dialogues. Persia feared the power of the ideas coming out of classical Greece, primarily the ideas of Plato. Now, Allison's fake history then carries through into his argument. In the 16 conflicts over the past 500 years, he claims most of them came from this Thucydides trap. Well, guess what? The majority of those conflicts came from the reigning empire of the day playing nations off against each other. Look at the list from the 19th century on. This is actually on the Harvard University's website. They put out a press release the other day extolling the fact that the Thucydides trap of Graham Allison was now in the news. Now, you look at that list, and followers of Promethean action, especially people who go to our Saturday classes, know the role of British geopolitics in fomenting most of those wars. But look at number 11, the one that didn't result in war, the one where America outpaced the British without a war. Well, that's not an anomaly. That's actually the key. Because during that same period, British financial and foreign policy institutions, the Round Table, Chatham House, the Council on Foreign Relations, they systematically colonized the American foreign policy establishment from the inside. There didn't have to be a war because Britain took over America's foreign policy institutions by and large. Now, that's over. Trump and his team have exited that imperial world. They're openly rejecting globalism. They're kicking over the geopolitical chessboard. And most importantly, they're reviving the American system, which gives the United States the independent economic strength to act. Again, look at the industry leaders that Trump brought with him to China. And look especially at the manufacturing revolution that is underway in the United States right now, and the fact that Donald Trump has established our energy independence. All of this gives us the freedom to act in our interests and not be controlled by the empire. This is not happening by accident. It's happening because the Trump administration has not only thrown off British geopolitics, it has thrown off the British system of economics, and it is publicly reviving the American system of political economy.
Fucking bastards.
It's happening because the Trump administration has not only thrown off British geopolitics, it has thrown off the British system of economics, and it is publicly reviving the American system of political economy. Trade Ambassador Jameson Greer talked about it in Davos back in January, and Peter Navarro spoke of it yesterday in an op-ed which talks about Henry Clay and describes in detail the pillars of the American system, including most especially for the current period, tariffs and the impact that Donald Trump's tariffs are having. This is what the British Empire has always feared. This is why they cooked up geopolitics and the great game in the 19th century, and why they repackaged it all as the Thucydides trap in the post-war era. They don't want sovereign nations to become economically and politically sovereign, so they constantly pit them against each other. Xi Jinping says the world is experiencing changes not seen in a century. Well, he's right. The 100-year cage the British built is being dismantled, and Donald Trump has gone way off script. But the president needs a movement of people who are also off script, whether it is Harvard's script or the screaming influencers on social media. That's what we do at Promethean Action. So if you want to be part of this, become a supporting member or contributor and help us shape the next 100 years. This has been your Saturday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at 𝓯𝓷𝓽𝓻𝓸𝓭𝓾𝓬𝓮.
Ha 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 ha.